waves whispered against the shore, a rhythmic lullaby that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. Amelia stood at the edge of the tide, her toes sinking into the cool, wet sand. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light shimmering on the surface of the water, casting a delicate glow over the deserted beach. She had always found solace here, where the world seemed to pause and breathe in harmony with her. Tonight was different, though. Tonight her chest felt heavier, her breaths slower, as if the weight of the past year was finally too much to bear. The loss, the heartbreak, and the endless search for a way to feel whole again, it had brought her here. She closed her eyes, letting the crisp, salty air fill her lungs, hoping for a fleeting sense of peace. The soft crunch of footsteps on sand broke her solitude. She turned, startled but not afraid. A man stood a few paces away, his figure outlined by the moonlight. His presence didn't feel like an intrusion. Instead, it was oddly comforting, as though he belonged to the same rhythm of this moment. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice low and soothing, like the hum of the ocean. "I didn't think anyone else would be here at this hour." Amelia managed a small smile. "Neither did I." For a moment, silence enveloped them, filled only by the sounds of the sea. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, they began to talk. He introduced himself as Lucas, a traveler who had stumbled upon this beach on his way to nowhere in particular. There was a gentle weariness in his voice, one Amelia recognized all too well. The hours seemed to slip away unnoticed as they shared pieces of their lives, fragments of heartaches, dreams, and the bittersweet memories that kept them awake at night. Lucas spoke of a love he had lost, a connection so deep it felt as if a part of him had been left behind. Amelia in turn shared her story, the ache of letting go of someone she had imagined forever with. "It's strange," Lucas mused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We come to places like this hoping to leave our pain behind, but maybe we're meant to carry it differently." "Differently?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Not as a burden, but as a part of us. A reminder of what we've endured and how much we're capable of healing." His words lingered in the air, weaving into the sound of the waves. Amelia felt something stir within her, a faint but growing lightness, as if the ocean itself was lifting some of her sorrow. As dawn approached, the sky began to bloom with hues of pink and gold, and they walked along the shore in companionable silence. Amelia noticed something glimmering in the sand and bent to pick it up, a small, sea-worn shell. She turned it over in her hand, its surface smooth and cool. "Here," she said, offering it to Lucas. "A token to remind you of tonight. Of healing." He hesitated, then smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that seemed to hold the promise of something new. "Thank you, but only if you'll take one too." They both searched the shore, finding shells to trade, a small but meaningful gesture. As the first rays of sunlight touched the water, Lucas glanced at Amelia, his expression soft. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," he said, "but I think it's going to be a little brighter." Amelia nodded, feeling the truth of his words. And as they parted ways, the beach now bathed in morning light, she carried with her the shell, a newfound sense of peace, and the realization that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about embracing the waves, letting them shape you, and finding beauty in what they left behind. The waves whispered against the shore, a rhythmic lullaby that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. Amelia stood at the edge of the tide, her toes sinking into the cool, wet sand. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light shimmering on the surface of the water, casting a delicate glow over the deserted beach. She had always found solace here, where the world seemed to pause and breathe in harmony with her. Tonight was different, though. Tonight her chest felt heavier, her breath slower, as if the weight of the past year was finally too much to bear. The loss, the heartbreak, and the endless search for a way to feel whole again, it had brought her here. She closed her eyes, letting the crisp, salty air fill her lungs, hoping for a fleeting sense of peace. The soft crunch of footsteps on sand broke her solitude. She turned, startled but not afraid. A man stood a few paces away, his figure outlined by the moonlight. His presence didn't feel like an intrusion. Instead, it was oddly comforting, as though he belonged to the same rhythm of this moment. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice low and soothing like the hum of the ocean. "I didn't think anyone else would be here at this hour." Amelia managed a small smile. "Neither did I." For a moment silence enveloped them, filled only by the sounds of the sea. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, they began to talk. He introduced himself as Lucas, a traveler who had stumbled upon this beach on his way to nowhere in particular. There was a gentle weariness in his voice, one Amelia recognized all too well. The hours seemed to slip away unnoticed as they shared pieces of their lives, fragments of heartaches, dreams, and the bittersweet memories that kept them awake at night. Lucas spoke of a love he had lost, a connection so deep it felt as if a part of him had been left behind. Amelia, in turn, shared her story, the ache of letting go of someone she had imagined forever with. "Strange," Lucas mused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We come to places like this hoping to leave our pain behind, but maybe we're meant to carry it differently." "Differently?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Not as a burden, but as a part of us. A reminder of what we've endured and how much we're capable of healing." His words lingered in the air, weaving into the sound of the waves. Amelia felt something stir within her, a faint but growing lightness, as if the ocean itself was lifting some of her sorrow. They continued to walk, their steps creating faint impressions in the damp sand. Every so often, one of them would pause to pick up a shell or pebble, turning it over in their hands as if searching for some unspoken meaning. The quiet between them wasn't heavy. It was warm, like an unspoken understanding that words couldn't quite capture. Lucas gestured toward the water. "Do you ever feel like the waves know something we don't? Like they're carrying messages back and forth that we're too distracted to hear?" Amelia tilted her head, watching the way the moonlight danced across the surface. Maybe they do. Or maybe they're just patient, waiting for us to listen. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips, and for a moment he said nothing. The world around them seemed to blur, the expanse of stars overhead, the gentle hum of the tide, the vast stretch of sand that held no end in sight. It felt as though they had stepped into a different realm, a space where time bent and swayed with the pull of the ocean. Each step brought them further into the embrace of the night, the path ahead endless and full of quiet possibilities. The moon hung like a lantern in the sky, casting a dreamlike glow over the world, as if it too were a quiet observer of their journey. Amelia felt a strange peace settling into her bones, a peace she hadn't known in months. Lucas walked beside her, his presence soothing, the kind of company that made her feel as though she could exhale fully for the first time in so long. Have you ever wondered why certain places pull us in like this? Amelia asked, her voice soft but steady, the question more for herself than for him. Lucas glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. I think some places are like mirrors, he said, his gaze turning toward the water. They show us parts of ourselves we didn't even know we were looking for. Maybe that's why we come here, to find things we've lost, or to leave pieces of ourselves behind so we can finally move forward. Amelia nodded, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket. There was a quiet truth in them, an acknowledgement that the past was not something she could simply erase, but something she could learn to carry differently. The sea had a way of making things feel less permanent, like each wave that rolled in could wash a little more of the hurt away, without ever promising that it would be gone for good. The sand beneath their feet had grown cooler, and Amelia pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, feeling the crisp night air seep into her skin. She felt more awake than she had in ages, as if every sensation, the salt on her lips, the cold breeze on her face, the sound of the ocean, was reminding her of the life she had almost forgotten to live. As long as it lasted. As long as it lasted. Do you believe in the idea of healing, Lucas? She asked, her voice a touch hesitant, as if the question itself might be too much for a single moment. His response came without hesitation, as if he had already asked himself the same question countless times. I think healing is like the tide. It's not a straight line. Sometimes it feels like you're being pulled further into the depths, and other times it feels like you're being carried to the surface. But even in those moments when you think you're drowning, there's always something, some small part of you that's still fighting to rise. She looked at him then, really looked at him. In the dim light, his features were soft, almost ethereal, and she felt as though she were seeing him for the first time. Not just the man standing beside her, but the quiet strength in his eyes, the weariness in his soul that echoed her own. And for the first time in so long, Amelia allowed herself to feel that strange connection. The kind that transcends the past and the future, existing only in the fragile present. A distant light caught her attention, flickering from beyond the curve of the beach. It was a lighthouse, standing tall and steadfast in the distance, its beams sweeping slowly across the horizon. For a moment, Amelia wondered if it, too, was a kind of guide, a silent watcher in the night, reminding her that even in the darkest hours, there was always a light somewhere in the distance, waiting to lead her home. "Have you ever been to the lighthouse?" she asked, her voice a gentle curiosity. Lucas followed her gaze. "I've seen it from a distance, but never up close. Something about it always made me think it was a place best left alone, like a secret that wasn't meant to be uncovered." Amelia's heart fluttered. She wasn't sure why, but the thought of that lighthouse, with its solitary beam cutting through the darkness, seemed to call to her. Maybe it was the quiet promise it held, the idea that there was a place, a beacon, that could bring her back to something she thought she had lost. She glanced at Lucas, a silent question in her eyes. Without saying a word, he nodded, and together they began to walk toward the lighthouse. The sand shifted beneath their feet, and the night seemed to open up before them, as though the world itself was preparing to unveil something long hidden. As they drew closer, the sound of the waves grew louder, the ocean seeming to rush toward them in a way that felt both inviting and intense. The lighthouse stood like a sentinel on the edge of the world, its light sweeping across the sea with a quiet grace. And yet, there was something mysterious about it, something that stirred the deepest corners of Amelia's heart. When they finally reached its base, the tall, weathered stone tower loomed above them, the beam of light flashing intermittently, as if waiting for them to step into its glow. The air felt thick with something unsaid, something not yet discovered, and Amelia found herself standing at the foot of the lighthouse, her hand resting lightly on the rough stone. "I don't know why," she whispered almost to herself, "but I feel like I need to climb it." She strode to the desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the tablets until she had her hands on a large steel foot. Lucas stood beside her, his presence grounding. "Maybe it's not about the climb," he said softly. "Maybe it's about what you find when you get there." Amelia took a deep breath, her heart beating in her chest. She didn't know what she was searching for, but something within her stirred, a quiet, undeniable pull that urged her to step forward. Without another word, she began the climb, her feet finding steady purchase on the worn stone steps. The air grew colder as they ascended, the wind whipping against her face, but with each step she felt lighter, as though the weight of her past was lifting piece by piece. Lucas followed closely behind, his presence unwavering, and together they moved toward the top. And as the beam of light swept over them, illuminating the dark expanse of the beach below, Amelia couldn't help but wonder what secrets the lighthouse might reveal, or whether the light it cast was simply a reflection of the one that was beginning to grow inside her. As they reached the top of the lighthouse, Amelia paused for a moment, her hand resting on the cold metal railing that circled the tower. The wind howled around them, tugging at her hair, but it didn't matter. From here, the world felt vast, yet strangely small, like a canvas waiting to be painted with new possibilities. The beach stretched out before her, the waves continuing their endless dance, their rhythm unwavering despite the storms they had weathered. She looked out toward the horizon, where the sky and the sea met in a seamless blend of dark blues and grays, and felt something deep inside her shift. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel lost. She didn't feel broken. The lighthouse, this symbol of unwavering light in the darkest of nights, reminded her that even in the most uncertain of times, there was always a way forward. Beside her, Lucas stood silent, gazing out at the same view. His presence was no longer just comforting, it was grounding, as though they were two souls who had unknowingly crossed paths at just the right moment. After a long stretch of quiet, Amelia turned to him. "Do you think we're meant to find what we're looking for? Or are we just meant to keep going until we do?" Lucas considered her question, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about finding something. Maybe it's about realizing that everything we need is already inside of us and we're just rediscovering it, one step at a time. Sometimes healing isn't about a destination. It's about the journey itself." Her reaction simplified his question. Her reaction? Amelia felt the truth of his words wash over her, soft but undeniable. Healing wasn't an end point. It was the process, the gentle unfolding of oneself, the shedding of old layers, and the acceptance of all that had come before. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed was to trust that the waves of life would guide her, and that she, too, was capable of finding her own way. As they stood there, the lighthouse beam sweeping across the darkened water, something shifted within Amelia, a sense of peace that she had longed for, even when she hadn't known it. The weight that had once been so heavy in her chest felt lighter now, as if the ocean itself had helped her release the grief, the doubts, the fears, and in their place there was space for something new, something hopeful. "I think we're ready to go now," she said quietly, her gaze lingering on the horizon, knowing the journey wasn't over, but it was beginning to look different. Lucas nodded, the faintest smile on his lips. "Whenever you're ready." They made their way back down the stone steps, the night still holding them in its embrace. The sound of the waves seemed to follow them, each step a reminder that they were not walking alone. As they descended the final steps of the lighthouse, Amelia's mind swirled with a quiet sense of clarity, though she couldn't quite put it into words. The night had shifted something deep within her, as though the sea had whispered its secrets to her and left her with an unspoken understanding. She could feel Lucas walking beside her, his presence still comforting, though now it was different. There was a sense of shared space, of mutual quiet understanding, that they both carried like a secret they didn't need to speak aloud. The waves still roared below them, but now, instead of feeling distant and daunting, they felt like old friends, reliable and constant. Amelia's thoughts drifted as they walked back along the beach, the damp sand cool beneath her feet. The lighthouse behind them stood like a silent guardian, a symbol of light in the dark, always there, always steady, waiting for those who sought it. It occurred to her that perhaps healing wasn't about big revelations or dramatic changes. Maybe it was simply about the smaller moments, the quiet walks, the shared silences, the soft reassurances that even in the darkest hours there would always be a way forward. "I don't want to go back to the world just yet," Amelia said softly, breaking the quiet that had settled between them. The thought of returning to the noise and busyness of life, of re-entering the chaos she had fled, felt like an overwhelming task. Lucas gave her a gentle smile. "You don't have to rush back. We've got the night, and the ocean is never in a hurry." His words carried a kind of warmth that Amelia hadn't realized she'd needed. The world, in its relentless pursuit of progress, had always made her feel as if she were falling behind, constantly catching up to something, always in motion but never truly arriving. But here, in the embrace of the beach and the soft glow of the lighthouse, she understood something different. She didn't need to rush. Life wasn't a race, and there was beauty in the pause. They continued walking slowly, side by side, with no particular destination in mind. The world seemed to have stretched out around them, vast and endless, the sound of the ocean wrapping them in a cocoon of calm. In the distance, the soft glow of the lighthouse faded as they moved further along the beach, but its light remained in Amelia's mind, an ever-present reminder that even when things seemed dark, there was always a way to navigate. But as they walked, Amelia's thoughts returned to the past, to the life she had left behind. The memories no longer felt as sharp or as heavy. They were like the shells scattered on the shore, each one holding a story, a lesson, a piece of her that she could carry without feeling burdened by it. She didn't have to forget the pain, but she didn't have to let it define her either. Do you ever wonder if you're running toward something or running away from something? She asked, her voice soft, almost wistful. Lucas's pace slowed slightly, and he glanced at her with a thoughtful expression. "I think sometimes we're running toward something without even knowing it," he said after a beat, his words measured. "But maybe it's less about the destination and more about the direction. Maybe the act of moving, of putting one foot in front of the other, is enough to help us find our way." Amelia nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. There was no map, no clear path to follow, but there was the movement, the quiet acceptance that the journey itself was what mattered most. The search for something, whether it was healing, peace, or love, didn't have to come in a specific form. It could be in the steps they took together, the small moments of connection, the shared breaths as the night held them in its quiet embrace. They reached a small cove where the water lapped gently against the rocks. Amelia lowered herself onto one of the larger stones, feeling the coolness seep through her clothes as she gazed out at the sea. The horizon was still dark, but the faintest trace of light was beginning to break through, promising the arrival of another day. Lucas sat beside her, close but not too close, his presence a constant reassurance. Neither of them spoke for a while, and it was the kind of silence that felt right, not empty. The night was winding down, but neither of them seemed eager to let it go. They sat in the quiet, letting the sounds of the water soothe their minds, the soft winds carrying away any lingering tension. But something had taken possession of her. She couldn't tell whether light had clouded her mind or whether her body was just as... Eventually, Amelia glanced at Lucas, a thought forming in her mind. "What do you think comes after all of this? After the healing, after the letting go?" Lucas turned toward her, his eyes soft with understanding. "I think After all of it, we just become. We exist without the weight, without the expectations. We simply are. And that's enough. She took in his words, letting them settle like pebbles in her heart. We simply are. The simplicity of it was almost overwhelming. There didn't need to be a grand ending, a definitive moment when everything clicked into place. There didn't need to be a perfect resolution. Healing wasn't about a destination. It was about arriving at peace with where you were, right here, right now. A feeling. As the first rays of dawn stretched across the sky, turning the horizon from deep blues to soft pinks and oranges, Amelia felt the stirrings of something new. A quiet hope, a gentleness within her that she hadn't known she'd been missing. She was no longer running. She wasn't searching for answers for some grand revelation. She was simply being. And in that being, there was peace. And with that, the world continued its eternal rhythm. The waves crashing gently against the shore, the lighthouse standing tall in the distance, and the soft, persistent pull of the ocean guiding them forward. Footnote: the journey as it turned out would never truly end. But perhaps that was the beauty of it. The healing was in the movement, the letting go, and the quiet trust that, with each step, they would find their way. The sky continued to soften as dawn broke fully, bathing the beach in a warm, golden glow. The once grainer waves now shimmered with the first light of day, a quiet reflection of the peace that had settled between Amelia and Lucas. There were no words spoken, just the shared understanding that the night had given them all they needed. For now, at least, there was no rush to move on, no urgency to step into the day. The world felt suspended in that beautiful in-between moment. Amelia stood, brushing the sand from her legs, and looked down the stretch of beach. The horizon, now a canvas of soft oranges and pale blues, seemed to beckon with a promise of new beginnings. It was a gentle reminder that the world was always in flux, always moving, always changing. But in those moments, everything felt right where it was. Lucas followed her gaze. You know, sometimes I think we get so caught up in the big moments, like the falling in love or the achieving the goal, that we forget the quiet ones matter just as much. It's the stillness, the simple moments of being with someone or being in a place that holds just as much beauty. Amelia smiled, feeling the truth of his words resonate deeply within her. She had spent so much of her life chasing after something, always striving to find the next step, the next goal, the next thing that would make her feel fulfilled. But what if, all along, it had been the quiet moments she was running from, the moments where she could just be? She turned to Lucas, grateful for his presence, and offered him a soft smile. I think I've spent a lot of time trying to fix things, to make things right, to find the answers. But you're right. Maybe it's the stillness I've been avoiding. Maybe it's time to just sit with myself for a while and let everything breathe. Lucas nodded, his expression kind and knowing. Sometimes, the only thing that needs to change is our perspective. The rest of the world can shift on its own. They stood there together, silent for a long moment, as the sun's golden rays bathed them in warmth. Amelia let the quietness surround her, allowing herself to feel the weight of the night gradually lift, replaced by the gentle hum of a new day. The horizon stretched wide and open in front of her, endless, just like the possibilities that lay ahead. "I think I'm ready," she said finally, the words feeling both simple and profound. "Ready for what?" Lucas asked, his voice light. "Ready for whatever comes next, ready to just be." He smiled at her, a look of quiet approval in his eyes. "You're more than ready." Together they began walking along the beach again, each step taken with intention, each breath a little deeper, a little more connected to the world around them. The ocean's waves continued to kiss the shore with a soft, rhythmic pattern, as though the earth itself was breathing along with them. For the first time in so long, Amelia felt the stirring of something deeper than the pain she had carried for so long, a quiet, yet powerful sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that would erase the scars of her past, nor the kind that promised an easy future. It was the kind of peace that whispered, "You are enough, just as you are. You are enough, right here, right now." As they walked, they spoke little, but the bond between them was undeniable, unspoken yet profoundly felt. Amelia knew that life would continue, the tide would ebb and flow, but she didn't need to hold on to the uncertainty anymore. She didn't need to cling to the past. She had found her way back to herself, piece by piece, as the ocean had been steadily doing all night long, its waves pushing and pulling, erasing and replenishing, until what was broken could be reformed into something new. The horizon before them was now fully bathed in the morning light, the beach stretching out endlessly as they continued their walk. There were no promises, no guarantees, but there was an undeniable sense that they had both been brought here for a reason, that the journey had already begun, and it would continue, quietly unfolding, like the waves that kissed the shore without question. Amelia's heart, for the first time in years, felt open, lighter, and full of quiet possibility. The road ahead was uncertain, but as the sun climbed higher, casting its warmth over the world, she realized that she was no longer afraid, no longer running. The faintest hum filled her head, felt her flesh, felt her tendrils. Her tendrils felt moving. She was simply being, and for now, that was enough. They walked further along the shore, the sound of the waves mingling with the soft whispers of the morning breeze. The light continued to stretch across the beach, reaching into the corners of the world, painting everything in golden hues. Amelia felt an unfamiliar sense of freedom, like a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had slowly started to lift, piece by piece, with each step she took. The quiet was soothing. The world felt distant and yet entirely present. There were no distractions, no demands, just this moment. Here, now. For the first time in a long time, she realized she didn't need to chase after anything. The need to find answers, to fix what was broken, to solve the puzzle of her life, all seemed so distant. She was here, she was breathing, and that was enough. A few steps ahead of her, Lucas turned toward the water. The waves were beginning to rise and fall more gently with the changing tide, the rhythm of the ocean steady and constant. He stopped, and for a long moment Amelia simply watched him. His presence felt like a quiet support, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone, even in the vastness of the world. When he turned back to her, his gaze met hers with an openness that she hadn't expected. It was the same kind of openness she felt within herself now, a freedom that came from letting go, from releasing the need to control every moment. Do you ever think about the places we've been and wonder what they've left behind in us? Lucas asked, his voice soft but carrying a weight of meaning. Amelia paused, considering the question. Her mind wandered back to all the places, both physical and emotional, that had shaped her. The paths she'd walked, the people she'd encountered, and the memories that still clung to her, some gently, some with more intensity. All of it, every experience, every connection, had left its mark. "I think everything leaves something behind," she said, her voice thoughtful. "We carry pieces of every place, every person, every moment. It's like the ocean here. Each wave brings something, and then it takes something away. Maybe we don't always realize it, but we're constantly changing, constantly evolving, like the ebb and flow of the tides." Lucas nodded, seeming to absorb her words. The silence that followed felt like a conversation in itself, a shared understanding without the need for further explanations. There was comfort in knowing that life didn't have to be figured out in one moment, one answer. The journey was enough. And the waves, the beach, the sky, they all understood this better than anyone. The further they walked, the more the world seemed to expand before them. The stretch of sand now seemed endless, the horizon just as far away as it had been when they first arrived. And yet, something about this vastness no longer felt intimidating. It felt inviting. Like the space between them wasn't empty, but full of possibility, waiting to be filled with whatever came next. Amelia felt her hand brush against Lucas's, almost accidentally, but when their fingers lingered for a brief moment, she didn't pull away. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was just two people walking the same path, moving forward together in the same quiet rhythm. In that simple touch, she felt a deeper connection, one that wasn't defined by words or grand gestures, but by the shared experience of being in the moment, of walking side by side through the silence and the sound, through the light and the dark. "I've spent so much of my life trying to avoid things," Amelia said suddenly, the thought spilling out of her before she could stop it. "I've tried to avoid pain, avoid feeling like I don't belong, avoid confronting the parts of myself that I don't want to face. But I think the real peace comes from facing them, accepting them." Lucas stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her fully. There was a gentleness in his eyes that made her feel as if, for once, she didn't need to hide. "It's a hard thing to do," he said quietly, "but maybe it's not about avoiding the parts of ourselves we're afraid of. Maybe it's about realizing that those parts, even the ones that hurt, are what make us who we are. They're what make us whole. Tension transforms the world." His words lingered in the air, floating between them like a soft melody. Amelia felt the weight of them, deep in her chest. they're what make us whole. The realization was quiet, but profound. It wasn't the absence of pain that made her whole, it was the acceptance of it, the willingness to let it be part of her journey. They resumed walking, the sound of the ocean guiding their steps. Amelia felt a lightness she hadn't known in a long time, as though the pieces of herself she'd spent so long trying to hide were no longer burdens. They were just part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was. And then, as if to mark the moment, the sky above them shifted again, the light of the morning now growing brighter, more vibrant. The sun stretched its golden fingers higher into the sky, and Amelia felt the warmth of it on her skin, welcoming her into the new day. And she glanced over at Lucas, who was watching her, and in that moment she realized that the journey wasn't about one person finding all the answers. It was about the shared experience, the quiet companionship, the unspoken understanding, the gentle trust that life would continue, unfolding as it was meant to, moment by moment. "I think we're both exactly where we're supposed to be," Amelia said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had shared and everything they had yet to understand. Lucas gave her a small, knowing smile. "I think so too." They walked on together, the vastness of the beach stretching before them, the ocean a constant companion, and the journey still unfolding, slowly and without end. There would be moments of doubt, moments of questioning, moments where the road ahead seemed unclear. But for now, at least, they had found something important, the ability to simply be, to walk forward without fear of the past or the unknown, and to trust that, no matter what, they would continue to move forward, together, one step at a time. As they continued their walk along the beach, the rising sun warmed the world around them, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and lavender. The sand beneath their feet seemed to glow with the light of a new day, and Amelia, though still uncertain of what awaited her, felt a quiet certainty rise within her, a knowing that no matter where the path led, she had already begun to find her way. With each step, the weight of her past seemed less burdensome. She no longer carried it like a heavy stone around her neck. Instead, it had become a part of her story. Each chapter, each moment, a piece of the whole. She could accept it now. She could look back and see it not as something to escape, but as something that had shaped her, taught her, and brought her to this moment of peace. Lucas walked beside her, his presence still steady, still comforting. His hand brushed against hers again, this time more intentionally, and their fingers intertwined. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the silence. They were both aware that the healing they had been seeking wasn't something to be completed or finished. It was an ongoing process. Like the ocean, it ebbed and flowed, but it was always moving, always changing. They reached a point on the beach where the waves gently lapped against the shore, the waters sparkling in the sun's light. Amelia paused, turning to Lucas with a soft smile. "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said that healing isn't about the destination," she said. "It's about the journey." He smiled back, squeezing her hand gently. "Exactly. It's about embracing each step, no matter how small, because every step brings us closer to something new." Amelia's heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the connection she had with Lucas, but for the understanding that was blossoming within her. She no longer felt the need to rush or to force things. Life would unfold as it was meant to, one breath at a time. There was no timeline, no deadline. There was only this moment, the sand beneath her feet, the sky above, and the peace within her heart. The ocean waves continued to roll in, rhythmic and eternal, a reminder that life would continue to move forward, no matter what. The future was still unknown, but she no longer feared it. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing wasn't having all the answers, but allowing life to unfold naturally, trusting the process, and knowing that every step, every moment, was enough. As the sun rose higher, casting its warmth across the world, Amelia and Lucas stood there together, feeling the quiet, healing presence of the beach around them. There was no need for words now. Everything had already been said in the way they walked, in the way they stood beside each other, in the way the morning light touched their faces. In that moment, Amelia understood that healing was not a straight line. It wasn't a finish line to cross, but a gentle unfolding, a process of becoming and unbecoming. It was in the quiet moments, the shared silences, the stillness of simply being, with yourself and with others, that true peace could be found. And as they continued to walk, the message was clear. The journey itself is the healing. The steps we take along the way, however uncertain they may seem, are all part of what brings us home to ourselves. Together they walked toward the horizon, where the ocean met the sky, and with each step they let go of the past, of the fear, of the pressure to be anything other than exactly who they were in that moment. The journey was never about arriving. It was about learning to walk, step by step, knowing that each step was enough, and that the path would always be there, waiting for them.